Good morning.
Good morning.
Hope everyone's doing well. Let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, I have 7 pages of notes, so we have a lot of ground to cover this morning. We're going to try and see if we can't get from verse 18 to 25 or 26 respectively. So let's go ahead and pray, and then we will get started here. Lord, thank you so much just for this opportunity. Thank you for this time. Thank you, Lord, for just your word and the wisdom that it gives us. The information, Lord, where we can examine things here on this land in the proper perspective. Pray, God, that this would be beneficial and that this would be profitable and instructive, and that you would be glorified overall. We thank you so much, Lord, for it's in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, let's hit it. Talking about last week, our review, verses 12 to 17. Koheleth continuing to inform his audience, that is the congregation of Israel, about all of the activities that he completed for the sake of pleasure itself. This has kind of been the underscoring point here in chapter 2. It says, using the wisdom, that is the wisdom from God that he has in comparison to his activities, he concluded that the pursuit of pleasure for the sake of consistent satisfaction, this what you're made for, right? For the sake of pleasure itself is a useless and profitless enterprise, right? Concludes that if you're going to pursue pleasure for the sake of itself, you're going to come up empty, right? The last previous sum up we concluded last week, and he will kind of make the same point that I made last week, this week. If Koheleth, who has all the resources, is the wealthiest, wisest person at this time in history, and as purposefully and scientifically, I want to emphasize this point. This is a scientific exercise, like literally, an observational discipline and coming conclusions based upon his observations. This is a case study, a personal naturalistic observation that Solomon is doing. He completed all these tasks for his own purposes, for his own sake, or success, and comes to realize that physical death and humanity's awareness of his activity will be lost to history. Remember, no one will remember it. And we're talking about the collective humankind, not just one individual person, but collectively, humankind will not remember the wisdom he has or why he did this or anything else like that. Then we as human beings who do not have a tenth of his resources ought to think and respond. So if he has all these resources and he's not going to be remembered, where does that leave us, right? Continuing here in verse 18 of chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, says, I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. The word here highlighted in red, if you can see it on your screen, or underlined in your notes. Let's take a look at this word. This word again is sani, right? Now, we've already looked at this word here in verse 17. It's highlighted here on the PowerPoint and underlined in the notes. Remember, this word refers to sight, right? Or it could be referring to seeing something, but it's not just sight for the sake of looking at something. It is looking at something and coming to an evaluation or a determination of the quality of that thing, okay? It is not just sight for sight's sake. It's, again, think of it as an inspector who's looking at something and coming to a conclusion based upon that. Again, because of the overwhelming burden or overwhelming emotional state of the perspective of his activities, he is now lamenting about the result of it. If pleasure for the sake of pleasure is useless, and no one will remember you when you're gone, his perspective is, well, what in the world is this? Why am I doing this? Again, a very cynical perspective. Continuing looking at this particular verse here, Under the sun, we understand this particular idiom. This is the only time that this phrase is used of Solomon. Again, he's now lamenting at the results of his activity, and again, Qoheleth uses his idiom to discuss the aspect of his thought on this land, under the sun. I'm going to keep pounding this. He's talking about his perspective here. Does not have anything to do with hell or anything else like that. This is the outlook of a person that is here on this earth. Then he gives us a conclusive thought here. It says, "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me." Qoheleth gives the reader the reasons of why he's cynical and all the progress of his work, again, which is detailed in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 4 to 11. He acknowledges that due to the reality of physical death, that he must leave it to the person who comes after him. So he will not be able to steward this for an eternity physically. He's done all this work, and one day he will pass away. He comes to the realization of that, and at some point he's going to have to pass this on. Either he will become too old to tend to it and keep it, or he will die and give it to someone else, right? Either way, he sees this as a poor outlook. Now, why would he say this? Of course, this happens all the time, right? A person who passes on, gives their things over to another person. Well, why would he get so upset about that? Verse 19 gives us his reasoning. It says this, Qoheleth. He says, "And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun." This too is vanity. Oh, this is a problem. Qoheleth continued his thought from the previous statements. This is why we have this conjunction here, this and. Qoheleth asks a question whether a person is going to have the wisdom that he obtained. He's talking about himself in this case. Or whether they are going to reject the wisdom that he obtained. He has no control over that. So once he passes on and gives the next king who comes, the next king could be the greatest king after him, or it could be a dud, right? Could take what he has and use it, or take what he has and just squander it. And he has no control over it, no say, no influence, because he ain't there, right? Consequently, he has worked tirelessly, effortlessly to build this, and a person could take it and spend half of that to destroy it. And this person who may be a fool will have control. That is, that word here, control, is rule in the Hebrew text. Over all of his activity that he labored for in his wisdom. And he concludes again that he observed this activity from the aspect of living on this land, using his idiom under the sun. It is vanity. It is havel. It is of no use. It is temporary. It is fleeting. It is of no consequence. Well, combine this, Bert, with seeking pleasures for pleasure's sake. That's not fulfilling. You passing on and dying like the fool. That's one thing you got to consider. Passing on your things to a person, and you don't know the quality of how they're going to treat it when you leave. How many times have we heard of individuals who squandered other people's stuff that they've passed on, right? And you don't know that. He says this in verse 20. Therefore, I completely despair. What a statement. Of all the fruit of my labor, all the works that I've done. I've looked at them and, man. Let's discuss these two words here. Completely despaired for a brief minute. Completely is the Hebrew word sabab. Okay? It occurs 154 times in the Hebrew scriptures. It literally means to turn around or to circle, to encompass, right? To surround something, right? It is written in the qual stem, which again we've emphasized here that this is the active of the Hebrew word here of sabah. This underscores again. You can kind of translate it as therefore I turned around or I was completely encompassed. This underscores his overall perspective of what his focus was regarding his activity. He's taking all of the things, all of the information, all of the data from what he has done and has made this conclusion, this complete conclusion about everything. Okay? It is resolve. The word despair is ya'as. In this text, it only occurs 7 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Okay? It means to despair or to be desperate, to be hopeless. To be hopeless, right? No promise, no future, right? Hopeless. This is due to the questions that Qoheleth is asking himself based on his observations, and this causes Qoheleth to become hopeless, despair. So it's not, he is completely focused on this. This isn't, this isn't just like a check in the box or something like that. This is his cognitive thinking, his perspective, his state of mind. Okay? That he sees all of these things as hopeless. He completely despairs of all the fruit of his labor. Again, this is the 3rd time that he said this. All of the works that he's completed, he looks at as just it's hopeless. It's like veneer, right? It's just the cheap paint is wearing. There is of no value. Again, Qoheleth returns to his activities, that he turned his perspective to hopelessness, complete hopelessness concerning all the work that he had completed under the sun. Now, it's worth noting that he's not coming to these conclusions on purpose. Like we usually do that, right? We'll kind of look at our life and go, why is this? Why am I even doing this? Right? This is kind of we do it on accident. We have a flash of thought, you know what I'm saying, a moment of clarity or something like that, and then we come to the conclusion, oh my gosh, I've wasted my life on this, right? Qoheleth doesn't have this mindset. We talked about this in chapter 1. He is focused on this. He says that he's doing this using his wisdom. So this is something that he's making these conclusions on purpose. He's purposely putting himself in these situations. His observations are not accidental or indiscriminate. This is what makes this book so awesome, right? He's not coming to these conclusions. I look back upon my life, I realize I have all these regrets. No, he starts off going, I'm going to do this on purpose. This is to inform the congregation of Israel that if one or all adopt this view, eventually this will be their outlook. This is instructive. It's very unique. Koheleth does not want a people's perspective. He doesn't want people to fail if they don't have to. I've done all the work for you. This is what you're going to come with. This is what's going to be the result if you have a mindset like this. You're going to come to this conclusion. Verse 21. Now he starts to give some of his findings. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, he will give his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. Let's take a look at these two words here, either underlined in your notes or you can see it in red on the screen. Let's look at knowledge. Dahath is the Hebrew word for knowledge. It occurs 93 times in the Hebrew scripture, 7 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? It means knowledge, understanding, or discernment. So recognition of something, an understanding of something, coming to the conclusion and understanding that fully, or having a knowledge of something. Again, this is information, according to this word here in Ecclesiastes. It is information or words that bring awareness or perspective to a person. You know, if I told you something that you didn't know and you have insight into that thing now you have knowledge. Okay? Matter of fact, we've seen this word before in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. In verse 16, Solomon or Koheleth uses this word. He says, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind, that is the immaterial, that is housed within our spirit, has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. My mind has observed a wealth or a plethora. If you get the reference. If you don't, never mind. Of wisdom and knowledge, things that have made me aware of things, information. We see the word again used in verse 18 of Ecclesiastes, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Remember, we talked about this very briefly, that the more awareness that you get, the more you realize that this world is dumb. There is a mental anguish to the more that you know, because you see that things aren't to be as they are, or things could be better. Let's take a look at the word skill. Kisron is the word here in this text. It occurs 3 times, and this word only occurs in the Hebrew scriptures in the book of Ecclesiastes specifically. It is translated as success, as in being successful, skill, as in having an ability, or profit. This word is associated with the proficiency and ability of one's labor. So when you labor well or do things with excellence, it is you have skill, right? So Koheleth, that is Solomon, in verse 21, talks about when there is a man who has wisdom, who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, who has awareness of what they're doing, who has an ability to do that and makes the right decisions. aligned with the reality of God, and then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. I want to talk about this for a minute. The word legacy is the word halak. Okay? This word occurs 67 times in the Hebrew scriptures, occurs 8 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It could be translated as portion or share or even reward. When you do something and you get a reward for that, the word halak is used, or recognition. Since he's discussing his death in this context, I think the word translated legacy is a good thing. Now, I want to mention something here for a minute. It's not wrong to leave a legacy for a person. If you own a house or if you have a nest egg or something and you pass it on to your children or whoever it is, maybe a society or an organization or something like that, that is all well and good, right? However, Koheleth brings up the fact that this is useless, this is vanity and a great evil, considering the fact that if you pass on something to someone, you can't see how they're going to steward that thing. So to leave a legacy, according to Koheleth, is somewhat useless because you're not around to see how they're going to use it, right? In other words, building a legacy for the sake of remembering or being remembered is not a good thing, according to Koheleth. You ought not to be pursuing that, or at least the perspective of that. And that's why he brings it here in verse 21, continuing. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, the guy who labored did everything right. Then he gives his legacy to the one who has not labored with them. This too is a vanity and a great evil. You see the difference? This person has not had the ability to give them the wisdom and the knowledge of how to take care of it, how to steward it, how to protect it, how to make sure that it doesn't get squandered and squelched, because they're not there. They can't tell them the red flags. This is kind of the same idea with Rehoboam. Remember, we talked a little bit about Rehoboam, right? Rehoboam was a young king, right? Son of Solomon. He was supposed to go to the elders, right? He was getting overworked. Daddy Koheleth overworked the servants, right? And they basically told him, hey, if you go and just give them, don't overburden them with so much. Right? He went to the elders, right? His dad wasn't there, he was dead. So he went to the elders. What did Rehoboam do? No. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you more work. I'm going to give you more of it. The very legacy that Solomon had, he ended up losing because of that decision. One generation, it was gone. Koheleth continued to talk about the reason why he is hopeless. He mentioned that the person who adopts his labor, that person has not been instructed and taught how to rule like him or with him. Continuing on to verses 22 to 23. For what does a man get in all of his labor and his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all of his days, his task is painful and grievous. Even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. He's using Havel an awful lot, right? Koheleth asks a rhetorical question. This question, the answer is he's already given us this answer, but again, questions are used to reinforce a main thought, right? He's not asking a question for the sake of investigating the answer. He's already given us the answer in the previous verses above. But he's asking this question as to reinforce the perspective that he's trying to communicate to the congregation of Israel. He mentions that humanity's task is grievous on this land. Let's look at the word task for a minute. Inyan is the Hebrew word here. 8 times it occurs in the Hebrew text. It only occurs in the book of Ecclesiastes. It does not occur anywhere else. This can be translated as, again, a task, as a job, or an investment, or an effort, right? Doing something and receiving something in return. You make an investment, you receive a profit for that. You exert effort, that effort is rewarded by said result, right? Or task. Koheleth mentions that it is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men. He's not dissing God in this statement. He's making an observation. This is referring to the overall purpose of human beings and their activity. How do I know this? I know this because Solomon has used this word before in chapter 1, verse 13. He says, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom. Remember, this is a purposeful exercise using the wisdom of God and making comparisons here. Concerning all that has been done under heaven, it is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Sounds very similar to what we just read, right? He also uses this word in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 10. He says, I've seen the task which God has given the sons of men which to occupy themselves. That is the purpose by which God has given the sons of men to be busy with, to be concerned about, to do. Okay? So it's not just talking about a specific task. This is talking about the overall function and activity of humanity. God has given humanity certain tasks and things to do. Let's take a look at the word painful for a minute. Remember, this word painful is used in chapter 1, verse 18, concerning the mental anguish that it brings to those who recognize it. That is, there's increasing pain, makub. It is that there's a mental and cognitive strain when one observes things as they are, right? Ignorance is bliss. You have knowledge of something and you become aware of something. You end up, can I just unlearn this? Can I just unsee this, right? Then there is the word grievous, which is ka'as. I know in the notes it should actually be flipped in the notes. Okay? This word occurs 25 times in the Hebrew text, ka'as. It occurs 5 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It expresses the state of being of grief, anger, or provocation. From the perspective that Koheleth is using, this word underscores the state of being that this life brings. It is frustrating and exasperating. However, I want to make this note. Remember that this is in the perspective of the research that he's done with his activity. Right? I want to keep this in mind here. Of course, we do have frustrations in life. That's obvious. But remember, he's not coming from just a random philosophical position. If you look at your life the way that Solomon is looking at his on purpose, you will come to this conclusion. Okay? As a matter of fact, a lot of atheists think this way. Well, life sucks and then you die. There's nothing else, right? Because they are looking at a perspective to underscore what Mrs. Eustace told me last week, an inside the box perspective. I'm glad you remembered that, right? Matter of fact, he even says this. This is kind of interesting. He says, for what does a man get in all his labor and his striving for which he labors under the sun? Because his days and all his days, his task is painful and grievous. Even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. Koheleth contrasts the mental frustration and anguish, the exhaustion, and how not only it occurs in a person's life during the day, but also in the evening. They can't stop thinking about this. It will drive them crazy when their mind, that is their leb, not their brain, their mind, does not remain silent. I mean, have you ever sat up late at night worrying about something? You can't sleep, tossing and turning, things like that. The mind has no rest. You're constantly thinking. You're trying, you're taking your warm milk. You know what I'm saying? Trying to, maybe you'll take like a melatonin or something like that. You're trying to let your mind stop. The point is why they are working and laboring. It is always on their mind. This too is useless. Man, Koheleth just taking a sledgehammer here. Koheleth has told the congregation of Israel that when it comes to laboring for their own pleasure or establishing a legacy for the sake of being remembered under the sun, this is irrational. I want you to think about that. It is without reason. We may think it's reasonable. In the sight of God's wisdom, it is not reasonable. It is irrational. And laboring to this end is foolish. It is foolish. However, Koheleth gives the congregation of Israel and us this morning our first silver lining in this text. I mean, he's literally just beat. If we have a perspective like this, he's just beating us up, like literally, like philosophically. He's taking a sledgehammer and just, no, that ain't it. Nope, try again. Nope, can't. Nope. Sorry. Let's try this again. He'll make you want to brush your teeth with a pistol. But we get our first silver lining here in verses 24 and 25 here. It says, there's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. Wait a minute, I thought labor, wait a minute, I thought there was nothing useful to labor. What is this? Right? Well, check this out. Koheleth gives the solution to this issue. So he's not just going to leave us on a ledge, right? What is the perspective that we ought to have? Koheleth gives the solution. There's nothing better or good. That word is tov, the word translated better. To eat and to drink, and cause his soul to enjoy. That's actually the literal translation. To cause his soul to enjoy that your labor is good. Koheleth underscores the source of the work and the labor itself. The labor itself comes from the hand of God. Remember, this is all about outlook and perspective. You don't labor for labor itself. You don't labor for the pleasure itself only. You labor for the source of the one who gave it to you. That is the only thing that matters. Not just the work, but the one who's given you that opportunity and that labor to work. Then we get to verse 25. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? You see this word here, seen? That word is the word ra'ah. It is the same word that is used when you look at something and you examine it. I have seen that this is from the hand of God. I've looked at it, I've studied it. I've investigated it. And these things are from the hand of God. So we don't serve labor. We don't serve pleasure. We aren't even trying to build a legacy, because the person who comes after me may squander that, and it's all for naught. Instead, we live for the one who gives us the labor in the first place. That's what matters. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? Oh boy, I only have about 8 minutes left. You see this here? That's not what that says in the Hebrew. Let's talk a little bit about it. Let's talk about enjoyment first. It's going to take me some time to explain this, but let me start with enjoyment first. It'll be easier for me to explain it this way. Okay? I'm telling you right now, this translation is interpretive. Okay? Let me tell you why. So let's look at the word enjoyment first, and then we'll talk about the without him. The word enjoyment is the Hebrew word hus. Okay? This Hebrew word occurs 20 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Okay? This word only occurs here in the book of Ecclesiastes. So it's used 19 times other places, but it only occurs here in the book of Ecclesiastes. So that tells you that this is an interesting point that Koheleth is making. Again, this Hebrew word is a verb, and it means to either make haste, hurry, or be ready. Now, I looked at all of the other times that this word is used in the Hebrew scriptures. This is the only time where this word in the Hebrew scriptures, in my Bible, is translated enjoyment. All the other times it is translated quickly, or hurry, or make haste, or things like that in terms of one's actions. Hurry, go here. Hurry, make haste, and do this. This is the only time that it is used, is translated as enjoyment. Only time, right? Or be prepared, right? In terms of urgency. Again, all the usages of this word has with it the concept of rapid or quick action. So boom, 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 right? I don't think enjoyment is like that. Well, maybe I guess if you're enjoying yourself, right? Let's go here, let's go there, let's go. You know what I'm saying? I guess so. But the word itself in all other places is translated with rapid or quick action. This word is written in the qual stem, again, which is active, and it is the yuktol. This is the imperfect, which denotes a continual or open-ended activity. So this is not just something that Solomon did, or he's concluding that who can have enjoyment. It's not something that you just come to a one-time thing, but it's a continual thing. It's something that you continually have on your mind. If Koheleth is talking about perspective, outlook, this is an outlook that one always ought to have all the time, right? This word enjoyment is talking about the activity in relation to his work, to his labor, how he was able to complete things in a short period of time based on the resources he possessed and the conclusions of that, right? So it's not that he was going around, right? I mean, he was able to use his resources quickly to do these things, right? If we were to do what Solomon did, we wouldn't have 2 lifetimes, right? But he was the king of Israel. He had all these resources at his disposal, and he was able to do things fairly quickly, right? He had lots of servants and things like that. He was able to get resources done fairly well. Let's take a look at this word without, that's not the one. That's whose, but it's not that. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I'm right. Okay. This Hebrew word occurs 164 times in the Hebrew scriptures, and it comes from the root word in Hebrew meaning to sever. Okay. This word only occurs once in the book of Ecclesiastes, and the word itself means outside, without, outward. Kind of think of like a wall, a dividing line that a person who is on the outside is not inside that wall, right? Think about your house. People who are outside of your house, or they're outside, they're outward. Okay. This word emphasizes a thing, a person or thing that is excluded from something else. So you can translate it without, or you can translate it outside, or you can have that concept. The fact is that something is excluded. Okay? Oh boy. Okay. Minmini. This is the him in this statement. Now, this word, this is kind of interesting. Hebrew's kind of fascinating. It's a fascinating language, okay? Because the symbols have effects on the word itself. Let me explain. The first part of this word in red is a preposition, okay? Now, we know prepositions. It introduces a word or concept within a sentence, right? And prepositions show direction, location, time, or introduction of an object, right? When we use of, it's a preposition of possession. In, maybe a preposition of location. We understand this, okay? Or it introduces an object. This is usually followed by a noun or a pronoun, right, to some extent, okay? So we see that this is, again, a preposition, the one bolded in red here. Now, what about the one highlighted on this one? You see these lovely little symbols here. This is what is known as a pronominal. What is that? Well, a pronominal is a suffix, but it's not a suffix like in the English way of our understanding of what a suffix is. You have a prefix and a suffix. It's not like that. As a matter of fact, there are 4 suffixes in the Hebrew language. Okay? They are added to the end of a word, and they can be added to any type of word. They could be added to adjectives. They could be added to prepositions. They can be added to participles, infinitives, that is to be. They can even be added to some particles as well. All of these things can have suffixes. They're very flexible. Matter of fact, the most flexible in the Hebrew language. Now, this is kind of interesting because this suffix itself, this pronominal, is always understood to either be a personal or possessive pronoun. Personal. So let me translate this. Matter of fact, let's throw some other translations here on the screen. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 25. New King James Version, if you have it. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment more than I? That doesn't say him. Uh-oh. Is Koheleth talking about God or himself? Darby, very literal. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 25. For who can eat or who can be eager more than I? I like that. Because the enjoyment, that doesn't really make much sense in relation to the word itself. But the eager, to be anticipatory, that makes sense. How about Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 25? For who can eat and who else can hasten to it more than I? I even like this better. Okay? Ecclesiastes 2:25, for who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I? And the Young's Literal, the YLT, who can eat it and who can hasten out more than I? You notice the difference. So why is this here? Why are they translating it like this? Well, those who translated who can have enjoyment without him, they believe that the main subject of the sentence is God. It is in the hand of God. Who can have more enjoyment without him? However, from the context, the overall context of chapter 2, and even include chapter 1, this is Koheleth's personal account, all right, of his activity and the conclusions. So, let me sum it up in a big bow. Koheleth's point in this statement is, since he has done it all, he's built massive structures, collected tons of precious metals, and had the pleasure of both ear and body more than anyone before him. He mentions this in chapter 1, by the way. If he can do it bigger and better than anyone, and he comes to these conclusions, pleasure for the sake of existence is irrational. Legacy for the sake of existence is pointless. And labor comes from God, who has given humanity this for his own activity. What alternative perspective is better than his? That's the point. You can't outdo him. He's done it all. You cannot outdo him. You cannot outdo his outlook. You will not come up with anything different than what he's done. That adds more punch to verse 25. Now we get to this statement in verse 26. For a person who's good in his sight and is given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he's given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. This needs its own teaching. There's some things we got to talk about, because there's some questions we have to ask. What does Koheleth mean when one is good in his sight? What does that mean? What does it mean as he concerns the word sinner? Wait, I thought everyone was a sinner. What does he mean by this good and sinner distinction? What does he mean by that? What does this entire statement even mean? And why is this here? I mean, out of all the places he could have put it, why did he put this statement here? What is the point of this? Right? We will continue that next week. That involves its own study. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we will close out here. Lord, thank you that we have the tools to make the meaning clear. It is rather interesting, Lord, the perspective of Koheleth and how he has done this for us, purposely for us, so that we may have knowledge of how to look at life here while we live, to have the proper worldview. Thank you, Lord, that to look at things other than how Koheleth has laid them out by your wisdom is truly irrational. It is madness. May we continually have this thought to think on these things, not on labor in and of itself, but you being the source of labor and giving that to us. Thank you, Lord, so much for who you are and for what you have given to us. For it's in your Son's name. Amen.